In the heart of America's capital, something happened on Monday that had never occurred before in the nation's 248-year history. President Donald Trump invoked rarely used federal powers to take direct control of Washington, D.C.'s police force and deploy the National Guard within the city limits. This wasn't a wartime emergency or a natural disaster response. This was what the president called Liberation Day for the nation's capital. The announcement sent shockwaves through the corridors of power and raised fundamental questions about federal authority, local governance, and the unique status of America's capital city. For the first time ever, a sitting president had exercised emergency powers hidden deep within decades-old legislation to federalize a major American city's police department. But before we dive deeper into this historic development, I want to ask you to hit that like button if you're finding this information valuable. Share this video with others who need to understand what's happening, and subscribe to our channel for more breaking news analysis like this. The move represents the most significant federal intervention in Washington, D.C.'s local affairs since the city gained limited self-governance over 50 years ago. Trump cited recent violent incidents as justification, including the killing of a 21-year-old congressional intern and the beating of a federal employee during an attempted carjacking. Standing before cameras, the president declared, "This is Liberation Day in D.C., and we're going to take our capital back." Yet city leaders pushed back immediately, pointing to crime statistics that paint a very different picture of public safety in the district. Democratic Mayor Muriel Bowser called the federal takeover unprecedented and highlighted data showing that violent crime in Washington has actually dropped to a 30-year low. The disconnect between federal claims of a crime crisis and local crime statistics sets the stage for what could become a defining constitutional battle. To understand why this moment matters so much, we need to step back and examine the unique legal and historical relationship between the federal government and America's capital city. Washington, D.C. isn't like other American cities, and the reasons why trace back to the very founding of our nation. The story begins with the Constitution itself, which specifically calls for the creation of a federal district to serve as the seat of government. The founders wanted to ensure that no single state could hold sway over the national government, so they carved out a special territory that would fall under direct congressional jurisdiction rather than state control. For nearly 2 centuries, this meant that the residents of Washington, D.C. had virtually no say in their own governance. They couldn't vote for president, had no voting representatives in Congress, and watched as federal officials made decisions about their daily lives from government buildings, just blocks away from their homes. The population was historically majority black, adding layers of civil rights concerns to the already complex governance structure. Everything changed in 1973 when Republican President Richard Nixon signed the Home Rule Act, finally allowing D.C. residents to elect their own mayor and city council. It was a milestone moment for local democracy, but the legislation came with important caveats. While it granted significant local control, it still reserved extraordinary powers for the federal government. Among those reserved powers was Section 740 of the Home Rule Act, a provision that allows the president to take direct control of the Metropolitan Police Department during emergencies. The takeover can last initially for 48 hours, with possible extensions up to 30 days. No president had ever used this authority before Monday's announcement. The act also preserved the president's ability to call up the National Guard within D.C. This power had been used before, most notably during the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, when Guard members were later criticized for flying a helicopter dangerously low over peaceful demonstrators. The Guard was also deployed during the January 6, 2021 Capitol attack, when Trump supporters overran the building where Congress was certifying electoral votes. These precedents provide context for understanding how federal powers can be exercised in the district, but Monday's move went further than previous interventions. By taking control of the police department itself, Trump crossed a line that had never been crossed before in American history. The legal framework exists, but the practical implications remain murky and untested. The justification for this unprecedented federal intervention centers on public safety concerns, but the data tells a more complex story than either side initially acknowledges. President Trump pointed to several high-profile violent incidents to support his decision, including recent attacks on federal employees and congressional staff members that captured national attention. These incidents undoubtedly shocked the community and raised legitimate concerns about safety in the nation's capital. When congressional interns and federal workers become victims of violent crime, it naturally draws scrutiny to local law enforcement capabilities and raises questions about whether additional measures might be necessary. However, Mayor Bowser and city officials responded with comprehensive crime statistics that challenge the narrative of a city spiraling into chaos. According to official data, violent crime overall has decreased significantly, reaching what officials describe as a 30-year low. This represents a dramatic improvement from elevated crime rates that peaked in 2023. The statistics show particularly notable progress in categories like carjackings, which dropped approximately 50% in 2024 and have continued declining this year. These numbers suggest that local law enforcement strategies and community programs have been making measurable progress in addressing street-level violence. Yet the data also reveals concerning trends that complicate the picture. More than half of those arrested for serious crimes are juveniles, creating challenges for the justice system and raising questions about long-term solutions. The extent of punishments for juvenile offenders has become a particular point of contention for the Trump administration. This juvenile crime pattern highlights broader social and economic issues that extend beyond traditional policing approaches. It suggests that while overall crime rates may be improving, the underlying factors driving some individuals toward violence require more comprehensive interventions. The disagreement over crime data reflects deeper philosophical differences about how to measure public safety and what interventions are most effective. Federal officials appear to be focusing on high-profile incidents and concerns about juvenile justice policies, while local officials emphasize overall statistical trends and community-based progress. Don't forget to like this video and share it with anyone who wants to understand this developing situation, and make sure you're subscribed for our continued coverage. As this unprecedented situation unfolds, it raises profound questions about the balance of power between federal and local authority in America's unique capital city. The immediate practical implications remain unclear, as no legal precedent exists for how a federal takeover of local police should operate day to day. Court challenges appear likely, given the extraordinary nature of the action and the strong objections from local officials. Legal experts will scrutinize whether the emergency conditions required for invoking Section 740 actually exist, particularly given the crime statistics showing overall improvements in public safety. The duration of federal control remains an open question that could prove crucial to the outcome. While the law allows for initial 48-hour periods with extensions up to 30 days, the administration hasn't specified how long they intend to maintain control. This uncertainty creates additional complications for police operations and community relations. Looking ahead, some Republican lawmakers have pushed for more permanent changes to federal control over D.C., including potentially repealing the Home Rule Act entirely. Such dramatic restructuring would require congressional action and would almost certainly face fierce resistance from Democratic members, making major legislative changes difficult to achieve. The broader implications extend beyond Washington, D.C. itself to questions about federal emergency powers and their appropriate use. If presidents can federalize local police departments based on crime concerns, it could set precedents for future interventions in other jurisdictions facing similar challenges. The situation also highlights the ongoing tension between D.C.'s role as the seat of federal power and its identity as a local community with over 700,000 residents who deserve responsive governance. These residents find themselves once again caught between competing visions of who should control their daily lives. The coming days and weeks will likely bring legal challenges, operational questions, and continued political debate about the appropriate scope of federal authority. How courts respond to challenges, how federal control actually functions in practice, and how the community reacts will all shape the precedent this moment sets for future federal-local relationships. What's clear is that Monday's announcement represents a turning point in the governance of America's capital, with implications that extend far beyond crime statistics or political positioning. The fundamental question of who governs Washington, D.C. has been reopened in ways that seemed settled for over 50 years. As we continue following this story, make sure to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to stay updated on all the developments in this unprecedented situation. The constitutional and practical implications of federal control over local policing will likely unfold over months, not days, making continued coverage essential for understanding where this leads.